Hello, everybody, and welcome back to PPG on Goldster. I'm really thrilled today to have with me a campaigner who's campaigning about things very close to my heart. This is Alan Wylie. He is campaigning for the future of libraries, and we're really, really thrilled to welcome you to Goldster, Alan. So tell us.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm really pleased to speak.
So tell us about your career and what it's like to be a librarian. Hello, Alan. Can you tell us about your career and how you got into libraries and what it's like to be a librarian?
Sure. Yeah, I got into libraries about 30 years now. I had always had an interest in books, and that's really why I wanted to work in libraries, which is not a thing that you hear very often now, unfortunately. But yeah, I had my first library job when I was about 19 as a library assistant in a lovely Art Deco library in Leytonstone in London. Beautiful original wooden fittings and just a beautiful Art Deco library. So I started there as a library assistant. I was just doing all the things that library assistants do, just helping people and doing. At that time, we had specialist librarians, so there was children's librarians and reference librarians and things like that. Library assistants were at the bottom of the rung, really. But I mean, a lot of those specialisations have gone now. A lot of library services don't have specialist staff, but at that time we still did. And we had a wonderful reserve stock of books that had been donated to the library service since the first Library Act in 1850. So we had the contents of lots of private libraries in our reserve stock, beautiful books from the 19th, 18th and before, century and before that. So that was my first job. Then worked my way up to the heady heights of being a librarian. I didn't go to library school. You don't have to in this country. In America, you do. You have to be qualified to be a librarian, but you don't. So I am what they call a shambrarian because I'm unqualified. But yeah, that's the term to use, a shambrarian. But I have got 30 years experience, so it kind of makes up for it.
It definitely makes up for it.
Yeah. I mean, you know, you learn on the job. I'm not saying it's not important to get a qualification in library and information science, but I didn't.
So you said you know at that time there would be.
So I went on to work in.
Sorry, we've got a real satellite delay here, everybody. I'm sorry about that. Carry on, Alan. Sorry.
No, I was just saying I went on to work in Hackney libraries, which was an experience in itself, really. Hackney's it's a great place to work, very vibrant, great communities, but it's also got its problems. But I basically worked as a reference librarian, so a research and information librarian in Hackney. And then moved on to Islington after that. Working in the reference library again, but then lots of councils are getting rid of their reference libraries. So I'm basically a generic librarian at the moment. So that's a kind of a very brief history of my library career. But
so can you explain to people who aren't library nerds like I am, what is the difference between a reference library and a lending library, and why are reference libraries being kind of phased out?
Well, the difference is pretty simple, really. We don't lend anything. and we are about research and information. So people come into reference libraries to find out things, everything and anything. I mean, my specializations were official government publications and statistics and European law. So basically, it's everybody from school kids doing homework projects to people doing PhDs, and just regular members of the public coming in to do research on their own things. So it's a lending library is where people borrow books. We do story time sessions for kids. We do lots of other things, kind of jobs, really. Reference libraries tend to be quiet. Lending libraries tend not to be. But that's something that is quite contentious, really, with a lot of people that work in libraries and a lot of people that use libraries. There is an argument that libraries have gone too far towards the kind of noisy leisure centre approach, rather than a quiet place where people can sit and contemplate.
And I would love for the Goldster members, everybody listening here today, to put in to the chat, if you can, your experiences of libraries and how you yourselves have found that they've changed in the last few decades. And I'm going to talk to Alan about this in a little while. We've got a comment here from Monique. I did my work experience at my local library when I was 16, which led to a Saturday job. I then got a full-time library assistant job in 1992, progressed to senior library assistant, then assistant manager in 2008. I then became a library liaison assistant in 2015 and worked there until June 2021 when my job disappeared. That is so heartbreaking. So we're talking all those decades of knowledge lost. Is that a typical story, Alan?
It is a typical story. We've lost, it's very hard to say, but roughly 12,000 library jobs since 2010. So, and that's a pretty kind of conservative with a small c kind of, figure, really. It's probably more than that. So that's a very, very common story that I hear all the time when I talk to library workers. And also about working your way up is a very common story as well. A lot of people start off doing work experience or volunteering in libraries and then kind of work their way up, So that, that's great to hear that someone's done that, but it's very sad to hear that they then lost their job. But that's a very common occurrence nowadays, sadly.
And what do you think are the consequences of the numbers of libraries that have been got rid of? I mean, just kind of taken out of service and sold for flats or whatever.
Well, I mean, if we look at the figures, we're talking about 800 plus libraries that have closed since 2010. So, I mean, the impact on the communities that have lost their libraries is quite significant.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of communities see a library as a focal point. They see it as a safe and trusted public space where they can come and borrow books, stay warm, and that's been a big thing recently. They've been used as warm centres. We have a lot of people coming into libraries that have got nowhere else to go. If it wasn't for the library, then they would be, they would be just wandering the streets, really. We have a lot of people who are homeless, a lot of people with mental health problems. We have a lot. So libraries are very, very crucial to not just the most vulnerable in our communities, but to communities as a whole. And they're one of the only public spaces where you don't have to spend money.
Yeah.
So they're a free public space. And a lot of libraries are doing away with fines and charges now. So, which is a good, which is a good thing, you know.
Yeah. Yes, kind of book
I
amnesty,
mean,
bring
I
the book
was
back,
just up
no
in, I
questions.
was
Yeah,
just up,
sorry.
yeah, that's right. No, I was just up in Dudley. I was up, there was a big protest in Dudley recently, and I was up there speaking at the protest. Basically, the people in that area, the council were planning to slash the library's budget by 1.5 million, which will absolutely decimate the library service. So there is a lot of anger and a lot of um, you know, a lot of protest in that area, and that's happening all across the country. People are very passionate about libraries, and people will fight for them, you know.
I think it's great that people are fighting for them. And I spend, as an author, I spend a lot of my time researching in libraries. And the things I've really noticed, you talked about the warm spaces. That's something I've really noticed, particularly with older people who can't afford to heat their homes. They're not at work in the day, and it's incredibly expensive. So to sit in a library, there are other people nearby, it combats loneliness, and it also means you can keep your mind active. The other thing I noticed, and I wondered if you've seen a change in this, how many school children need that as a place to do their work? And I remember a few years ago, there was a government argument that, children, everyone has computers at home. Well, actually, not everyone can afford a computer at home. And if you've got several children in a tiny home, how are they all meant to work in a space that everybody in the family needs? Have you noticed a big change in people using the library in that way?
Yeah, the thing about warm centres, I mean, people have always come into libraries to keep warm. It's not a new thing. It's a new thing because it's been in the news, you know,
Yeah.
and because of this kind of formalised thing to make them into warm centres. So, I mean, we've always seen that. That's not a new thing to library workers. The thing about children using libraries, yeah, a lot of children who live in overcrowded accommodation, a lot of children who live in family setups that are not safe or not conducive to studying or to quietness, or they just want to get out of the situation. Then they come into libraries.
Mm.
They feel safe in the library. Library workers are all DBS checked.
Mm.
They are all trained in safeguarding. So part of our job is to actually look out for children, spot things that teachers look out for as well.
Mhm.
If we think that a child is at risk, if we see children in the library during the day and they should be at school, then we have a responsibility to ask, why are you in this kind of thing. So
Yeah.
a basic kind of safeguarding kind of role.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that there's a worrying trend. I don't know if your podcast listeners have heard of this, but about staffless libraries, where
I've never
it's
heard
like
of
a bank system. It's like a bank system. It's been rolled out all over the country. So basically, what it is staffless opening, and you swipe your card, and it lets you into a library, but there's no staff there. Now, one of the main problems with that is that it actually bars under 18s and under 16s from unaccompanied access. So basically, what we're going down the route of stopping children and young people from accessing libraries unaccompanied.
And also
So
stopping
we're
libraries
actually
being
going
safe
backwards,
spaces.
to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. I mean, this was a big problem when it was first introduced in Barnet in London. There was a huge increase in antisocial behaviour. There was a huge decrease in people using the libraries because they didn't feel comfortable being in a library space without any staff.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of one of the worrying trends.
Okay, so with your campaigner hat on, what can we do as a community to talk about this idea of staffless libraries? If you're not happy with it in your area, what can one do?
Well, obviously you've got the kind of local democratic process that you can go through. So you contact your councillors, you contact your MPs, you raise this at their surgeries, but you also might find that the library has a friends group, and so it's worth getting in touch with them. It's worth joining the friends group. So it's, you know, basically bringing it to councillors and MPs' attention that you're not happy about it. And the most important thing really is to support the library staff, because a lot of library staff feel pretty isolated, you know, and a lot of them are unhappy about it as well, but they're not allowed to speak out because they're council employees and they have a code of conduct.
Interesting.
So it's difficult for library workers to speak up because they would actually be breaking their code of conduct. So it's important for library users to speak on their behalf.
Absolutely. That is a really,
And of course, use your library.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
I always forget the most obvious things. So join your library, take out plenty of books. You know, basically use the resource before it goes, you know.
Yeah.
The use it and lose it thing is very important, but at the same time, there's also got to be more than that, because a lot of very well-used libraries are still closing. But it is important that people use their library as much as possible.
So why is it that popular, as you say, well-used libraries are closing? What is happening there? That who's making that decision that a library that's obviously necessary to the community should be closed?
Sorry, Lucinda, it's glitching. I just missed that bit.
I
Sorry
I
about
said,
that.
you mentioned that even very well-used popular libraries are being closed down. Well, who's
Yes.
making that
Yeah.
decision? If they're so crucial to that community, who's making that decision?
Well, I mean, basically it's councillors that make that decision, but with the huge cuts to local authority funding since 2010, then councillors will say that they have very tough decisions to make. Now, me being a campaigner and me being a trade unionist, would come back to them and say, but libraries cost the pittance. They only cost somewhere between 0.3 and 0.6 of a council's budget. So we're talking about incredibly small amounts of money here that could sometimes be covered by cutting allowances, cutting the amount of money the council spends on consultants, etc., etc., etc. But councils are under a hell of a lot of pressure, and there are billions and billions of pounds in deficit, and some councils are going bankrupt. So, you know, we've seen a huge cut in funding. We've seen huge cuts in opening hours. We've seen huge cuts in staffing, huge cuts in book budgets. So there's been a hell of a lot of pressure on the sector for the last 13 years or so. And it's led to this crisis, really.
We've got a couple of very positive thoughts here from Sue. Our local library was under threat of closure, but we fought for it and it remains open. Well done, Sue and all the crew. It is a wonderful, light and vibrant place with lots going on for all sections of the local community. And we also have another comment.
That's great to hear.
It's really great to hear. And a comment from someone else here saying Essex had planned to close numerous libraries, but due to a large public campaign, they're now keeping all 74 open. Well done, Essex, and well done to all those people.
Can I just say that the Essex campaign has been an absolute inspiration to library users, library workers, library campaigners all over the country. Essex mounted a wonderful campaigning protest against library cuts and closures. I actually spoke at one of the meetings where 1,200 people turned up.
Wow.
for a protest, and I actually spoke on the steps of the council building. I think it was in Colchester. I might be wrong. That I speak so many times at these things, I get places mixed up. But yeah, it was a wonderful campaign, and well done to Essex.
So tell us, if other people want to emulate that in their local area, what was it about the Essex campaign that worked?
It was basically they pulled together a wide spectrum of people within the community. Really, it was trade unions, it was library users, it was teachers, it was lots and lots of different people who relied on libraries, who used libraries. And that really is a very important thing to do, bring together as many people as possible. Get children involved, get as many different people involved in the campaign as possible. And it was very well organised. You know, the marches and the protests were well coordinated, well organised. The local press were there, the regional news channels, national news channels. They got authors involved, which is very important as well. And can I just say that over the last 13 years that I've been involved in national campaigning, authors have been wonderful at supporting libraries. We've had authors from Michael Rosen to Philip Pullman to Philip Arda.
Slightly lost the connection with Alan there.
Lots of children's authors, because they realise how important library.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
We lost you for a little bit then, Alan, but we were talking about some of the great authors who'd come to support you.
Yeah, I mean, I said what authors like Michael Rosen, authors like Philip Arda, other children's authors. There's loads and loads of authors who have given their time, who have come to speak at protests, who have done interviews for the media in support of libraries. So I really must give authors, you know, my thanks and solidarity for doing that, because they've been wonderful.
Well, I know that with the Society of Authors, we're all encouraged to write letters, and you know, all authors I know will do that, because libraries not only important for us as researchers, but they're vitally important as places to showcase our books. So it's something that, you know, is very close at the heart of the author community. We've got a lovely comment here from Elaine. My local library has a cafe attached, runs classes, children's events, events by authors, and runs an annual literary festival. It really draws the community in. Sounds like a great library, Elaine. How do you feel about that model, Alan? Is that something that many libraries are able to embrace?
Yes, most libraries do that. Some libraries struggle to do it because of staffing cuts and funding cuts. The cafe model doesn't always work. It's a pretty hard one to get right. The author events are brilliant. One of the best services for doing that is Lambeth. Lambeth have a wonderful events program going throughout the year, with lots of very interesting authors and speakers. But most library services do that. So yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, libraries are limited by the budgets that they have or don't have anymore. So I mean, it's getting more and more difficult, but a lot of authors will do it for free if they know it's a library. So yeah, all these things are very important, and most library services do have a year-long program of events that they put on either themselves or they get outside organisations to come in and do them. I mean, a very important part of my job is outreach. So I go out to community centres, to whoever within the community, charities, and promote the library service. They come into the library, they promote their own services. So it's very important that we get out there. It's very important that we make links. It's very important that we are seen to be part of the communities that we serve.
So I think maybe a lot of people have got out of the habit of going to libraries because of the pandemic and lockdown, and they've got used to buying books online and reading ebooks and listening to audiobooks.
Yeah.
What would you say to people who perhaps haven't been to a library for a while? What can libraries offer to people?
You see, it's very difficult. The last 3 years, as you say, we had the pandemic and we've still got it to a certain degree. So libraries were closed down and then opened up, and then closed down and then opened up. So people, yeah, weren't coming into libraries for a large portion of that time. I mean, important thing to remember is that library workers, a lot of library workers were redeployed. So they were either doing test and trace work. Some library workers were actually working in cemeteries. So, you know, even when the library was closed, we were still working. So yeah, people have got out of the habit, and there's been a huge increase in e-books and online use of library subscriptions. But that was starting from a very low point. So when you see figures like 300 to 400% increase in usage, then before the pandemic, it was at a very low point. So yes, it's great, but at the same time, we haven't got the money to keep that going because we don't really get any more money from the government for doing that. So we've got to try and get people to come back physically into libraries, which is a difficult thing to do. We've lost a lot of the people who used to come through the doors. So a very important part of a library worker's job now is to go out, try and persuade people to come back to the library, and try to make the libraries relevant and welcoming to people. So, you know, all I can say to people is that we're still here, we're open. Most libraries have got wonderful stocks of books, some better than others, but that's for a myriad of reasons. We provide events, we do children's events, we do reading groups, you know, lots and lots of different things. So basically look on the council website, go into your local library, find out what's going on and come back, basically.
And perhaps if your local library doesn't have a readers group or a book club or something, perhaps you could suggest starting one. What do you feel about that, Alan? Would librarians normally be?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, oh yeah, I'm sure they would be. Yeah, I mean, we try and persuade library users to kind of start these things up and manage them themselves if they can. I mean, you know, it's all about empowering people and giving kind of a bit of control back to people anyway. You know, part of our job is about empowering communities and empowering people. So if people have got ideas, then just raise them with local librarians or with the head of service, and we're always open to good ideas.
Yeah, one of my cousins is part of a library group near
I
her.
mean, you know,
Sorry.
not all ideas are workable.
Yeah.
It really depends. You okay? You lost me again.
One of my cousins is part of a writing group at her local library. They set up a group for anybody who's
Okay.
writing to go and sit and write together. I've been along with her a couple of times when I've been with her, and it's such a great idea. And it just means for the library themselves, the library is amazingly welcoming, and they're very happy to dedicate an area of the library to a group of people sitting, writing, quietly reading their work aloud to each other. And it's been a real boom, I think, for them to be able to have this space to all get together and be so supported by library staff. So perhaps if people here are listening, that might be something you could set up in your library.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great idea. I mean, and library staff are hopefully very welcoming, to these ideas, and also are hopefully very knowledgeable about creative writing, about literature, about lots of different things that are linked to that. I mean, an important part of our job is reader development, actually developing readers. So actually, using our resources to encourage people to read, and not just for the enjoyment of reading, which is very important, but also libraries have got an information and educational role as well. And I think that's something that's been lost a little bit over the years.
Yeah.
We've kind of gone down this kind of culture leisure route, which, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying culture and leisure are not important. I'm just saying I think we've kind of lost the kind of educational role and the kind of information role that libraries play as well. So yeah, I mean, it's a very important part of our job to develop readers. That's what we're here for, really. That's what we do. That's the core of what we are, really, is books. It's not very trendy nowadays. A lot of politicians will talk about libraries and not even mention books.
Oh.
But basically, that's the core. That's the core of any good library service, is the depth and quality of the book stock. And if you get that right, you'll pull people in.
Yeah, definitely. We have a comment here, and I think this is something you touched on earlier. I'd love to work on it some more. When I visited my library as a child, you were expected to be quiet. However, when I started work, rhyme time and story time came in, and we got a lot of complaints from customers who just wanted to browse for books. What do you think about that, Alan?
Yeah, it's kind of discussion about kind of getting the balance right between people who want to sit quietly and people who don't. Um, it's something that kind of plays out in libraries every day, every hour. As an ex-reference librarian, I veer more towards the quietness, because that's the kind of libraries that I was trained in and kind of worked in. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a balance. So of course we need to have rhyme times, story time sessions, reading groups, whatever. They're not going to be quiet. And we do get people complaining, we do get people who are not happy about it. It's a part of our job to try and negotiate our way through these things. One of the problems and one of the trends in the last few years that haven't helped this situation is the design of new libraries, which are open plan.
Yeah.
So, and who share with other services. So open plan libraries are a nightmare. I've worked in them.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a very quick but funny story about Hackney. I trained in the old Victorian Central Library in Hackney, a beautiful red brick Victorian Central Library that a Carnegie type library. The council decided to sell it off. They then built a new library across the road, shiny, glass fronted kind of library, the kind of ones that councillors like, but are not very good as libraries. They then decided not to call it the Central Library, but call it the Technology Learning Centre. So for the first 6 months, we hardly got anyone coming in because they didn't know it was a library. So we used to get people wandering in through the door saying, "Do you know where the library is?"
What
And
a
we used to say,
nightmare.
"You're in it."
Were you not
So
tempted to just
finally, after well, yeah, but you're coming back to your code of conduct thing again. You know, you can't really just do these things. So for the first 6 months, we hardly get anybody coming in until the council cottoned on and called it the Central Library. But they designed the library as open plan. So basically you had the reference library, the lending library and the children's library all on the one floor, and it was an absolute nightmare to manage. Because how can you guarantee a quiet study space for people when you have school classes and rhyme time and everything in the children's library just across the floor? It's impossible. So yeah, that's made it a lot harder for library staff to balance these things.
Exactly the same happened at my local library in London as well. A lovely old Victorian library that was then sold off and a new one built, you know, in the shopping mall. And it's just, they had to get rid of, the staff told me they had to get rid of something like half of their books because although there was more floor space in terms of, you know, square meters,
Yeah.
they just didn't have enough shelves because it was designed to be an open plan space. And suddenly the reference area that used to be upstairs, which was always quiet and amazing, and then downstairs was where you could have fun and be noisy, which was a great way of doing it. Suddenly everything was open plan. And we've got a comment here as well. One library I worked in had a separate room for the children's library, which was fine, but when the library is open plan, it doesn't really work. And yes, Winchester Library was changed to the Discovery Centre. I did a lot of events there. I couldn't find it when I first went because I thought I was going to the library, turned up with all my books. Had exactly the same experience that you're talking about, Alan. But apparently it's now been changed again to the Ark. So once again, I would go there and not be able to find it as a visiting author. That's hilarious. I mean, a great space. I thought the Winchester Discovery Centre, as it was when I knew it, was superb. But again, you're losing those quieter spaces. And so it's not just the councils, it's the architects who are coming up with these plans. Do they never go into libraries themselves? Do they not have an awareness of what's needed? Why do they not consult library staff?
That's a very good question. Well, I don't know if architects use libraries. What we do know as campaigners is that a lot of councillors don't use libraries, and a lot of councillors are not library members.
Right.
So when it comes to making decisions about libraries, unless they talk to staff, which very rarely happens, then how are they making informed decisions about a service that they don't use and that they don't really understand? It's a big problem. Staff are very rarely consulted about anything, to be quite honest with you. Especially frontline staff, especially lower scale library staff, and they're definitely not consulted about the design of a library. You know, I know many libraries that are very badly designed, but of course a fortune. I mean, look at the Library of Birmingham, £191 million it cost.
And is it not fit for
On a
purpose?
PFI deal that's going to cost well, not really. I mean, it's not. I mean, they've had to slash the opening hours by half because the budget cuts. The staff have been slashed, so there's hardly any staff in there. It's like a cavernous kind of cathedral, so the sound goes up and down, up and down, up and down. It's just another big shiny glass-fronted library that councillors like to show off. And I know that sounds very cynical, but I've been looking at this for decades, and it's just they're like they're just, what happens is they build these big shiny town centre libraries, but they run down the other libraries, the branch libraries. Now, I'm not saying central libraries are not important, but if all you've got is a big shiny town centre library, but no properly functioning branch libraries, then you're basically not providing a comprehensive and efficient library service.
Yeah. So, well, we've got a minister for libraries, haven't we? I'm afraid I don't even know their name. What do they do? Are they not?
Lord Parkinson.
Right, thank you.
What did he do? Well,
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what they're supposed to do. What they do is another matter.
Exactly.
What they're supposed to do, because libraries are a statutory service, which is a very important point to make. Libraries are not a luxury. Libraries are not an add-on. Libraries are not a nice to have. They're a statutory service. A council has a legal responsibility under the 1964 Act to provide a comprehensive and efficient library service. Now, under the 1964 Act, the Libraries Minister has a responsibility to superintend the Act. So basically, they are supposed to intervene in unreasonable cuts. So if they see a local authority who is not providing a comprehensive and efficient service, or who is planning to make cuts to the service that would actually renege on their statutory responsibilities, Libraries Minister has got the legal right to step in and to actually, to actually put a halt to it if they want, but they don't. It doesn't happen. That's why library campaigners have to take out judicial reviews and legal action to try and stop these things. So, yeah, I mean, we've got a libraries minister, but there's been so many libraries ministers. They change every time there's a cabinet reshuffle. So the longest standing one was Ed Vaizey. Do you remember Ed Vaizey?
Yeah.
He was the longest standing libraries minister. But he wouldn't talk to me or other campaigners. So it wasn't a very constructive relationship.
It's just so frustrating. And this is in your capacity on the government's libraries task force, and the Minister for Libraries wouldn't speak to you.
No, I've only been voted onto the government's libraries task force in the last 2 or 3 years.
Oh, okay. That's slightly.
So the libraries ministers who've been in position since then, we have regular meetings with. It's part of my role as the National Libraries Workforce Rep on the Libraries Task Force to attend quarterly meetings with the Libraries Minister. So we do get to talk to them now.
And tell us about the government's libraries task force. What exactly is it, and what are you hoping to achieve?
It's one of the task force that was set up to kind of have an overview and a kind of link into kind of different areas of government policy. So the Libraries Task Force was basically set up to kind of link into the new government's library strategy, which is being written by Baroness Sanderson, who I met with in Bristol a couple of weeks ago. So she's actually meeting with library leaders and library representatives at the moment to feed into the government's new library strategy. So basically, during the pandemic, our kind of role was to look at the kind of safety side of closing and opening libraries. So my part in that was to put the views of library workers forward about working in libraries during a pandemic. So when libraries closed in March 2020, round about that time, it was basically kind of feeding into the kind of guidance that was given to councils and library services about safe working during a pandemic, which was incredibly stressful, really. But really, my role is to give library workers a voice at the top level.
Yeah.
And we'd been trying for 13 years to get a library worker on one of these government task force or kind of government groups, and finally we got one, and it's me.
Well, I'm very, very glad you're on it. We've got a comment here about counsellors. From a former librarian, I remember a visit from counsellors where I worked, and one of them wanted to know who was an intelligent crime author. I suggested he join the library, and he was absolutely horrified at the idea. I mean, that's just an extraordinary story. Who would be horrified at joining a library? Who was this person? So let's talk a little bit. I am aware we're starting to run out of time. So what does the government need to do, in your view, in order to help secure the future for libraries for future generations?
I hate to use this phrase because it's kind of linked to John Major, but we need to get back to basics, really. I think we've lost our focus. I think we've lost who we are and what we are. So I think there needs to be more kind of representation on a kind of advisory group or task force group where library users, library workers are involved, and they need to be listened to more, really. Especially library users. Library users are not listened to very much at all. A lot of the public consultations that take place are not worth the paper they're written on. The other thing is that we've lost £250 million in funding since 2010. It's a huge cut to national library funding. And there's a lack of proper policy making, a lack of proper joined up thinking about libraries. There's still a lot of confusion about what libraries are and what library workers do. So there needs to be more kind of promotion and more kind of publicity about what libraries do, what they are, and that we're still out here and that we're open, There needs to be a national campaign, a national presence. Libraries still don't have a national presence. We've got 151 different library authorities, which are all doing their kind of own thing, really. It's become very, very fragmented. Right. So really, answering your question, we need to get back to basics.
Yeah.
We need to kind of really sit down and have a kind of a moratorium on what libraries are, what we should be providing, how well we're doing things. There's very little data out there anymore, reliable data. So we really need to have an informed discussion, a moratorium on library cuts and the future for libraries, and involve as many people as possible in that discussion.
So anybody who's listening to this, what can they do to help kind of join a campaign? What is the best way to start campaigning for libraries?
Best way to start campaigning is not to just wait for the cuts, is to actually get organised before they even happen. Most councils and most library authorities are facing cuts or are going to face cuts. There are some huge cuts coming up very soon, and some libraries are facing them at the moment. So it's about getting in as soon as possible. It's about talking to the trade unions. So it would be Unison, it would be Unite, some library workers and GMB as well. So linking in with them, linking in with friends groups. So lots of libraries have friends groups. Talking to the staff and trying to basically get organised before the cuts happen.
Yeah.
So that's a very important kind of thing to do, and also to, as I said before, to involve as many people as possible. And also, you're not just fighting for your own little library. Although libraries are a focal point to your own community, you're fighting for the service. If one library closes, then it affects the whole service. So try and see it in the wider context. Libraries are a network, and it's not just single libraries. So you're fighting for the service, not just for your own library.
Yeah, and that's really important. This is as you said before, they are a statutory service, then they are an essential, and yet they're too often seen as a luxury, and actually they're something that we all need to fight for. And it's, as you say, it's not just about your own individual one, the whole country. I'm just horrified when I look at the stats and realize how many places in the country have lost their libraries. And as is always the case, it's usually the communities that need them most that have them cut, and the people who are benefiting from the most who are going to end up losing the most. It's deeply frustrating, and I'm really grateful, Alan, for the work that you do and all the other campaigners. And I just hope that you are listened to and that the government task force is actually able to do something, because we really desperately need to secure the future of libraries for upcoming generations. It can't all be about ebooks and everybody accessing resources from home, because we're going to lose that vital part of the community, and loneliness is just going to keep getting worse. I mean, such an important part of libraries is that community feeling, isn't it? And being able to help people, as you said, outreach.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're always been told we've got a kind of a loneliness epidemic, and that there's more people who are socially isolated within our communities, especially since the pandemic.
Yeah.
Well, one of the services that has been dealing with that and combating that for decades and decades are public libraries, but they're closing down all over the place, and library workers are losing their jobs. So that's where I say there's a lack of joined up thinking.
Yeah.
There's some kind of cognitive dissonance going on.
Thank you. There's some lovely comments in the chat, and just want to say to everybody, if you take away one thing from this today, I really hope that you will go and visit your local library if you haven't done for a while. And here's a thought: encourage other people to do the same, and maybe join a group at the library or join the friends of the library, set up a group somewhere. Thank you so much, Alan, for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure, and I really do appreciate the work that you're doing. So thank you very much for joining us on Goldster today.
Well, thanks for asking me to speak. It's been a real pleasure, and I love speaking about libraries. So anytime, anywhere.
There we are. You've got that message anytime, anywhere. And let's hope you have a better connection than we had today. I'm very sorry about some of the connection delays, everybody. Okay. I'm just going to tell you quickly who we've got coming up on book club this week. So on Thursday, I'm talking to the author of this book, Dickens and Staplehurst, a biography of a rail crash. Yes, full disclosure, he is one of my extended family members. I think we're second cousins once removed. Such a good book, and I really, really am enjoying it. I'm so absorbed in it. Fascinating idea to tell the story of a rail crash, not only about Dickens, who was one of the most famous people on it, but what he's done is gone through and talked about all the other people who he could find out about. A great research job and really, really well written as well. And then on Friday, totally different, wonderful new novel by Amanda Craig. You're not going to be able to put this down. It's brilliant. The Three Graces, it's very Goldster. A group of octogenarian female friends who've all ended up in Tuscany from various parts of the world, and the people that they are involved with and their lives. It's beautifully written, really fun. I just want to stay in this world. Amanda Craig is such a talented novelist. So Gerald Dickens on Thursday, Amanda Craig on Friday. Please join me on the Goldster Book Club on both of those days, and tell a friend. Get them interested in libraries and reading and the Goldster Book Club. Take care, everybody. I'll see you in a couple of days. Thank you for your lovely comments. And Alan, I'll let you go back to work in the library. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.